All right, man, peace. So, brothers, this is going to be volume 2 in the series that I recently started called Ruling Class Mentality. And it will be a continuation into the investigation over the claims by super liberals in the media and in various sports leagues that the use of the term owner is meant to imply the perpetuation of the dynamic between players and the actual owners of franchises that is equivalent to a slave master and a slave. And of course, the very sentiment is preposterous, but the reason why they're trying to propagate this notion is because, as I've already stated, they're attempting to bring cultural Marxism into these various sports leagues, whether it be the NBA, which is already highly culturally Marxist, i.e. super liberal, and now they're doing it in the NFL. They're trying to get the players, or the quote-unquote employees, really the proletariats, to believe that they should be quote-unquote equal with the owners, the actual benefactors, or the people who are signing the checks. They want people who receive checks to believe that they should be considered equal with those who are writing checks. And that is deleterious to the mindset of the so-called black man. Why is that? Because it's taking away his understanding of how important it is for him to own his own shit. When someone else is an owner, you should look at them as an end sample of what you want to be. Not a symbol of oppression, but as someone that you want to ascend to when it comes to their level of influence and prestige. We should all want to be owners, starting with our own lives, trickling down to our businesses, our families, etc. Not in an oppressive way, but from the standpoint that we know how to administer. They've taken away the belief in the so-called black man's mind that he should be an administrator, that he should be someone who handles administrative duties. You should just think that you're equal to everyone else. And the super liberals are trying to push this notion that the term owner should be eradicated as a facade. This is really an attempt to attack quote unquote white male hegemony. Why do I say that? Because we're going to see in this segment right here that there are going to be a couple of female sports reporters who sit down and they're once again going to rehash what occurred with Donald Sterling, the quote-unquote racist former owner of the LA Clippers. And I'm sure a lot of cats will say, why would you put racist in quotes? The reason why I put racist in quotes is because if we're going to call Donald Sterling racist, then we have to call a whole lot of other people racist. And once we understand that that's the standard, especially when it comes to certain prominent people in business, we're going to have to reevaluate what the overall business paradigm is. Not to digress, but our people empower certain mentalities when we maintain a slave mind. If we have a ruling class mentality, Donald Sterling could have been taken out of power far sooner than he was. But because we just dealt with it, sat back and said, well, that's just who he is. And other factions didn't give a shit until they realized how they could manipulate the black man's mind and make him the vanguard of the infantry in their super liberal, culturally Marxist army. That's when all of a sudden now they want to act as if they care about the so-called black man when they never have in the past. But I just want to investigate certain things here because Stephen A. Smith, as usual, and when I say as usual, I'm talking about the evidence that we've seen over various segments when it comes to this debate, that the so-called black man can see through some of these things. He understands that the use of the term owner does not denote racism or anything like that. It just denotes authority. These women are trying to get the so-called black man to disavow himself of the term owner, or to have the Caucasian owners disavow the use of the term, because they're just offended that a man will call himself an owner. This is really a gender issue more than it is a race issue, at least in this segment right here. And you can feel it if you pay very close attention. These super liberal women, as usual, are trying to coax the black man into joining them when there have been very few groups, demographics, segments of society, whatever you want to call them, who have attacked the black man more than the super liberal woman. So anyway, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
In an essay currently on The Undefeated, Natalie Diaz looks back at how that time impacted the NBA. Diaz writes, Sterling's power didn't come through winning. His power came through owning. In the case of the Clippers, what he seemed to believe was he owned were the physical bodies of the men who played for the franchise.
Let me say this very quickly before Roz Gold, given Woody's continues. Donald Sterling, in my view, is a pansexual. There's very little doubt about that in my mind. And one of the reasons why he wanted to act as if he owned the bodies of his players is because he was infatuated with them sexually and physically. Just my view of it, just my perspective on it.
Though what we are talking about is Sterling, we are also talking about other things. The NBA's beginnings, its past, its now, and also its future. We cannot ignore the conditions in which the NBA thrives. An extractive relationship reliant on the peak physical, intellectual, and emotional labor and performances of black men.
Brothers, do you see how Roz go on what she stressed the part about black men? This is a game that super liberal females play. They try to act as if they're concerned about the plight of the so-called black man when they could care less. Most of the men who are locked up are so because of their weakness to the ideologies that have been pushed upon them from their childhood by liberal females. They're the ones who are running a lot of these simple ass dudes back and forth through the court system for whatever reason. They're the ones who, for the most part, are sending them to prison, whether it be because of what they taught that young man or that young boy, or just to show their clout. But once again, the onus is always put on the 2,000 so-called black men in the entertainment industry, as opposed to the 15, 16 million scattered all across the United States.
Forcing owner Donald Sterling to sell the Clippers to another owner didn't solve the league's problems with regard to race. It's true the NBA is changing, and it's true the change is coming too slowly.
This person, Natalie Diaz, who we're about to see, is a cultural Marxist. She's an extreme, super liberal feminist. And she's only talking about the so-called black man because when she states the NBA is changing and the change is coming too slowly, she's not talking about the power that the so-called black man has in the NBA. She's talking about the lack of a female presence, the lack of an outwardly homosexual presence. That is what she's referring to.
We now welcome Ramona and Natalie to the show. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
I absolutely appreciate your
great work on both y'all parts.
Thank you. Absolutely. I'll start with.
I'm used to it. Whatever.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We have also former athletes here: basketball at ODU, softball at Stanford. That's right. We're well represented here at the table.
Yeah.
This person plays softball somewhere? Give me a break. Only softball she's familiar with are donuts.
To get to the conversation, I want to start with you. What is the state of race in the NBA after Donald Sterling?
Well, first of all, it always needs to be improved upon. Let's be very, very clear about that. But I also think it's important that a dichotomy is illustrated between that of Donald Sterling and that of today's owners. I've covered the NBA.
Bruh, Donald Sterling was only removed from the NBA 5 years ago, so let's not try to act as if he's so disparate from today's owners. And there were owners who did not want him removed 5 years ago, one of them being Mark Cuban. Many of the other ones acted as if they wanted him removed, but they knew that they had to vote for his removal or it would look poorly upon them that they would be siding with someone like him. But I thought that it was truly insightful and revelatory that Mark Cuban would stand by him. We know that they have a few commonalities, not just in race and belief system, but most likely in how they view society overall.
For 25 years now, and I'm incredibly proud of where the league is. Does it have a ways to go? Sure. Can we see more minorities in positions of power as general managers, as president of basketball operations? I'd like to see more than Michael Jordan be an owner in the National Basketball Association. Of course. But when we take into account what Donald Sterling said, and I want to read the quote that he actually said, because I know we heard the lines from him. He said, "It bothers me a lot that you want to broadcast that you're associating with black people. You can sleep with black people. You can bring them in. You can do whatever you want. But the little I ask you is not to bring them to my games."
Stephen A. Smith was quoting Donald Sterling as he was speaking to one of his MK Ultra sex slaves by the name of Stiviano, who also happened to be a transsexual who seemed to have had a connection in some way, shape, or form with Magic Johnson. I do believe that there's a lot more than meets the eye to the reason that Donald Sterling came down so hard on Magic Johnson and many of his tirades towards Stiviano. I think that there may have been some type of sexual issue between Donald Sterling and Magic Johnson, just my view of it. I'm not saying that they ever engaged in any form of coitus or intercourse per se, but would it surprise me? No, it would not, because the level of vitriol that man had for Magic, it was extreme. And he seemed to be upset that Magic Johnson has been allowed to live in his view, which seems to be an extreme lie over these past 40 years. Magic has been allowed to depict himself as this gregarious, magnanimous individual, and Donald Sterling seems to know a lot more about Magic than the average person seems to know. And he was venting to Stiviano, who once again is a Monarch program sex slave, a beta sex kitten. That's what that person was, and also a tranny.
I have not met one single owner in the National Basketball Association that resembles Donald Sterling in any way. And that was before the comment. I haven't met an owner that allowed players, that would bring not just friends, but female friends into the locker room, as you highlighted, Natalie, where he's literally bringing females into the locker room with half-naked men, black men, touching them and feeling their muscles and look at these beautiful bodies. And this is what he is saying.
The reason why he is saying that is because, once again, he is a pansexual. That's why when I put two and two together, the reason why he's so upset at Magic is because something was most likely going on between him and Magic. It would not shock me at all. He wanted to use the accompaniment of a female as an excuse to go into the locker room and ogle the players and hope that he could get certain players to come back to his bedroom. That's how they convert many of these players into pansexuals. They engage in these orgies with the players, and next thing you know, the player's kissing up on a man, or maybe doing something more extreme with another man in the bedroom or in an intimate setting.
These are the kind of things he did in the locker room. I have never heard of, I have never seen, I've never heard of, nor have I ever seen any owner other than him in the National Basketball Association do and say the things that he has done and said. So in closing, I would like to say, I appreciate your piece. It was fantastic, by the way. I just want to make sure that we understand why we are looking at the NBA and we're saying there's progress from the Commissioner Adam Silver on down. The NBA is a far better place without Donald Sterling than it was with him.
Well, the real question is, why was Donald Sterling allowed to be an owner as long as he was under the authority of David Stern? It's very clear that Donald Sterling and David Stern had a very close relationship as well.
There's only one Donald Sterling. There's only one. I'm talking about visually. Obviously, in the process, I don't know. I'm not fly on the wall. I have never seen another owner like Donald Sterling.
I feel like I have to ask one obvious follow-up question. We have some time I want to get into with Natalie and Ramona. And Ramona, your 30 for 30 podcast is amazing because it goes into some of the deeper motivations and insecurities of Donald Sterling, which I want to talk about. But here's the obvious follow-up question. For both of you, you have covered the NBA for 25 years. Ramona, you've been intimately involved in this league for some time. Did the Donald Sterling tapes shock you? Were you blown away? Or did you know something like this could be underneath the surface with Donald Sterling?
Oh, yeah, we knew.
We knew.
We covered him in Los Angeles.
Now, do you see what Stephen A. Smith did when Will Cain asked him that question? The first thing that he did was pass it to Ramona Shelburne, because he understands the implications of Will Cain's question. That if Stephen A. Smith knew that Donald Sterling was this level of quote-unquote racist for as long as he was, how come Stephen A. Smith was not the one to expose him, being one of the few so-called black NBA beat writers or NBA scribes or columnists out there? So Stephen A. Smith said, let me pass it to Ramona so I don't have to answer this question. And as soon as Ramona said, I knew, then Stephen A. Smith said, yeah, we knew.
Magazine had done a long story on it, that Los Angeles Times had done multiple investigations into it, but there was something about it being on tape, about hearing it. And remember, this is 2014. This is before Ray Rice, right before, same summer, but right before. We were not in a place where we had cell phone justice, okay? We didn't have that happening yet in this world. We weren't in a place where we had an organization like TMZ that would just run a tape like that. I'm not sure if that tape was made 5 years ago, if it came to a mainstream news organization, if we would have run that. I mean,
y'all would have ran it. And stop making excuses for why you knew that Donald Sterling was a racist for all those years and you did nothing about it. The only reason why this became such a big deal was because of how in-depth he went in many of his tirades, the fact that it was caught on audio, and the biggest reason is that it was a ritual. It was just a mechanism to allow Donald Sterling to sell the team for billions more than he actually bought it for. The dude bought the team for like $10 million and sold it for $2.5 billion or $2.2 billion, something like that. He didn't lose this at all. Donald Sterling does not care how people feel about him. He made a huge windfall in this deal. He did not lose. This storyline was concocted for one reason: to allow the embracing of Adam Silver by the top shelf black players in the league, to build trust for Adam Silver. in the eyes of the top shelf black players in the league. This whole thing was contrived.
Think so? Do you think that ESPN would have run it? CNN would have run it? LA Times? I don't know.
I kind of think ESPN would have ran it.
Found a way to
I'm
get
going to
that in
speak
there?
up for ESPN on that.
I don't know.
I think we would have found a way to have that on tape once it was verified that it was him, the worldwide lead to this place. I think they would. We would have found a way to.
Something I wonder about is also the sensationalism of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, it was on tape, which of course let us have this verification. Like we've been saying, like, oh, now we can verify it.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can push it forward. And of course, there are legalities that you have to consider.
Mm-hmm.
But what about Elgin Baylor?
Mm-hmm.
Like, at what point?
Elgin Baylor, a.k.a. Steven from Django. That's what you're talking about?
We verify these things, and it tends to be in professional sports in general. We verify them when they have some sort of sensational aspect to them. Mm-hmm. So it becomes the spectacle. And I think that is something that I feel is a little bit problematic about, when we address these, when we make these leaps and change, that some of the regular day-to-day was ignored, yet when it became sensational or spectacular, then we were forced to move.
I would say to you, there's not a place or a circumstance in America where you can't point to that being a reality. Usually the sensational highlights a particular situation. It forces you to lock in on that particular situation and address some of the crumbs or some of the remnants of what actually exists around it. Then it fades from the spotlight. And not that you get back to normal, but you're safe enough to get back to a place where some of these things are still existing, but it's not as prevalent as it once was before it was highlighted.
In other words, to make a long story short, in order for a disease to get treated, there has to be a major outbreak. They're not going to pay attention when there are only a couple of people showing up with the symptoms.
Personally, I'm just glad we got here. Yeah. I'm glad the conversation started, and I'm glad the conversation became public somehow. Even though it started from, as we found out in your 30 for 30 podcast.
When the liberal black woman starts speaking about her happiness with the conversation getting started, what she's really speaking about is the removal of Caucasian people who don't want to hug her and embrace her and accept her. Because all this is really about are liberal blacks trying to find a way to get validation from Caucasians.
Really started from a lover spat that turned into something, a national conversation around race relations, and the NBA was thrust into the front.
No, what it really started as is a ritual where they used Stiviano as the mechanism to quote-unquote expose Donald Sterling so that they could necessitate the sale of the team. Everybody won in the end.
In your piece for The Undefeated, you said language matters, words matters.
Now this is the crux of this video right here, brothers. I want you to pay very close attention because this is another manifestation of the concerted attempt that the liberal females are making to impose their thought process on the so-called black man, that they should associate the word owner with oppression.
And we saw the word owner become examined as well. And we saw players like Draymond Green speak up about the word owner.
Yes, the mama's boy.
What is your feeling around the table? Start with you, Natalie, on the term owner.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think all of our work here is about language in a way, and I think, I'm coming from a perspective of poetry where I do have this luxury of compression of language.
In other words, you're another artsy-fartsy cultural Marxist and a hypocrite who's probably never owned anything a day in your life other than your cabin out in the desert where you just play the flute and write a bunch of inane poetry that nobody cares about.
Just pulling a word apart. But at the same time, I think a lot of you are poets in a way of, talking about athletics, talking about how this relates to our culture and what this reflects. I think in terms of the word owner, and I don't think anyone can address it any more clearly than Draymond Green. We use this word.
She said she does not think that anyone could address it any more clearly than Draymond Green. What does that really say about her intellect? It's nothing against Draymond, but if you listen to his diatribe on The Shop, he comes off as a dude who does not even understand life. That's why he's so offended by everything. He said that when people look at the Golden State Warriors, they think of the players. They don't think of the quote-unquote owner, or they don't think of the bridge or whatever it was that he was rambling on about. That's not true. When people think of the Golden State Warriors, they think of everything. They think of the franchise. They don't just think of the players. And a lot of Draymond's tirade was based in his inability to understand how temporal his career is. It's timely. You have your time and then you move on. A lot of guys have trouble dealing with that there are going to be players that replace them. So no, you are not the franchise. You never have been. You never will be. You have your time, and your time will come to an end. But just the fact that she's trying to use Draymond as a reference, and Draymond used the term CEO totally out of context. In an NBA context, your CEO is not going to be your owner, especially since most owners are not chief executive officers. A lot of owners have processes that occur and they're not even in on it. It's handled by the GM or the team president or what have you. They will be considered the CEO per se, quote unquote.
Years ago, it doesn't make it right today. And what I'm worried about, I think the thing I'm questioning is you have the owner. Now, what does that mean about who that word is applied to, or who's beneath that word or above that word?
Allow me to chime in.
More cultural Marxism. I want to know who's beneath that word or above that word. Brothers, you have to be very careful with these super liberal females because they're trying to use all of these, these little ramblings, these rants, as just a way to get men out of power, out of believing that they should have power. Even if you earn that right, you should not think that you're quote unquote better than me. I could be the person selling cotton candy in the audience, but I'm quote unquote equal to you.
Because I'm really interested in all of your opinions.
And let me say this, just because you have an exalting title as a member of a corporation like a sports franchise, whether you be the owner or the team president or the general manager, that does not mean that you have the right to talk to people however you want to talk to them just because of their station. But no, we're not equal. There are no two things equal in the universe.
That's them in this. I got a really good relationship with Draymond Green. I got a lot of love for him and respect for him. I respectfully disagree with him on this particular issue. Here's why. Because
you have a ruling class mentality. To a degree. You still are a simp. And you have problems comprehending certain things. I have no idea why you're still an employee at ESPN where you could probably build your own platform and make way more money. But at the end of the day, you do understand in the grand scheme of things the importance of the term owner.
I own my house. I don't own anybody that's in my house.
Right.
But when you come into my house, there are rules and regulations that you're going to follow because I'm responsible for the overhead. I'm responsible for the bills. I'm responsible for this franchise. If Joe Lacob is the owner for the Golden State Warriors, the problem is Donald Sterling acted like he owned the players.
Absolutely. And this is exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to use Donald Sterling as an excuse to tell anyone who uses the term owner really that they're being quote unquote toxically masculine. They're not going there overtly, but that's what they're implying.
You don't have any evidence that Joe Lacob is that way. You don't have any evidence that Mark Cuban is that way.
Well, actually, we do have some evidence on Mark Cuban, brother. The man was basically running a brothel.
Peter Holt in San Antonio is that way. Steve Ballmer is that way. Donald Sterling's transgressions as a human being doesn't necessarily get attached to everybody. And so when I look at it from the perspective of Draymond or anybody else's issue with the word ownership, I'm saying, wait a minute. Those lights that are on in the Oracle Arena, Joe Lacob and those boys got to pay for that.
Absolutely. But once again, Draymond Green is a mama's boy. That's why you have to be very careful when you take what people like him say seriously, because it's very much akin to a child in a house who comes home, they leave the refrigerator open, they have the air conditioner on in a room that they're not in, they got TVs on in a room that they're not in. They have no understanding of how what they do is going to impact the person who actually has to maintain the home. That's Draymond right now. He's like a child. All he does is receive checks. He doesn't receive bills. So he does not understand what it means to be an owner and why it's so important to embrace that title. Because once you're an owner, now you're truly financially responsible for everything, not just what comes in, but also what goes out. And his brain is not functioning on that level yet. And that's why the cultural Marxists want to use him, because he's simple-minded.
The salaries. and for the people around you, the equipment manager, the equipment that's in the building, etc. You got to pay for that.
Thank you, sir.
There's nothing wrong with me saying I'm the owner of this franchise and I have responsibility and dominion over it. You can separate that from saying you own the player. And I can understand the sensitivity to the word owner.
I can't.
I think that it's wrong to automatically say the word should be eradicated just because somebody's going to find it offensive, when I don't believe it's based in fact in terms of collaterally. It doesn't apply to everybody, is my point.
In other words, Stephen A. Smith, you're making a rational point, but you're sitting with a couple of undercover agents whose intent it is to eradicate any form of rationale or logic, aka super liberal women.
Say very few people think they own other human beings. Obviously, Donald Sterling and his behavior being an exception to that. Changing the term from owner to governor, I'm very doubtful would have changed Donald Sterling's heart. I'm very doubtful it would have changed Donald Sterling's behavior. Owner is an aspirational term. Steve
Absolutely.
Jackson came on my show, The Will Payne Show, and he talked with you on The Jump, and he said, I aspire to be an owner.
And I saw the segment that Steven Jackson had on The Jump with Rachel Nichols and Jackie McMullen, where they were trying to force that concept on him, that he should be against the use of the term owner, and he rejected it as well. So a lot of black men seem to understand that these women are trying to force this concept on them, because once again, it's not about race with the woman. They're trying to use the black man as a guinea pig and as the vanguard, as a member of their own super liberal military, because they know they can't get things done on their own. They need the help of simple-minded men. What this is really about is trying to tell men that you don't own women, you don't own me. And they're trying to get simple-minded dudes to take that poison pellet on their own, because they know they don't have the strength to force the poison pellet down their mouth.
Proud that Michael Jordan is an owner, but nobody assumes that means he owns any people. He owns a company.
So Donald
Thank you, sir.
was a real estate baron, okay? He's the largest residential landlord in Los Angeles County. Like every apartment building you drive down Wilshire Boulevard, probably the Sterling Corporation owns it. And he thought of his team the same way he thinks of real estate, as property.
Right.
And everybody who works for his team and everybody who plays for his team were his property. Most people understand that you can't own human beings.
Right.
But I think language matters. He didn't get that. And I agree with you, Will. I don't think changing the term owner to governor would have affected his heart, because I think he saw everything as property, as something he owned, as something he controlled, as people who should be grateful to him for giving them a job. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Well, I have news for you, Ramona Shelburne. You probably should be a bit grateful to someone for giving you a job, especially if they had other options. I know that most modern day females think that they did it all on their own, especially once they're able to get to a certain level. You know, just as an aside, it's very difficult to get a woman to admit that someone helped her, especially when she becomes successful. Women do not like to give other people credit. They're known for being ungrateful. And when we watch this segment, a lot of those energies are being revealed right here, because they're trying to sell Stephen A. Smith and Will Kane on this concept of why the term owner should be eradicated. And when you listen to Ramona Shelburne talk, she's once again trying to flip it back on Donald Sterling, and how because of Donald Sterling, the title of owner should be removed. And it's obvious that this is about male-female dynamics.
Never saw that these players, they didn't need him to give them a job. They can go work and play anywhere. But it wouldn't change his heart. But I do think language matters, and I think it's a worthwhile discussion, because all of us here, we are employees, okay? And we work for an employer. That's different than saying ESPN owns me. That's different than saying that.
Well, I think that it's already been pretty well elucidated that that's really not what the average person believes when they're an owner. So why you're going back to that, I have no idea why, other than the fact that you have an ulterior motive. That being that you want to be a quote-unquote empowered woman. You see, these women care more about this than men do, than the so-called black man does, because within the nature of men is logic. Within the nature of the woman is embracing her feelings and her emotions. But I guarantee you that if any of these females on the panel were to run a business and own a business, they will call themselves the owner. Most women do not adhere to the concepts that they want other people to adhere to.
Owns a player.
Well, it sets a condition, I think.
We're just going to put a pause on it. We're going to come back to the conversation. We've got to take a break. Natalie, you were actually just saying something. We had to go to break. Let's continue.
Yeah, just to kind of like recap.
Brothers, pay attention to the fact, even though both Stephen A. Smith and Will Cain have explained the actual context of the term owner, these females are still striving. They're trying to get these men to buy into their personal feelings about this.
I think the word owner does set a certain condition. Like language sets the conditions for which we then move in.
Absolutely. The condition that the term owner sets is that I'm going to be the one who's financially responsible for everything. So I'm the presiding factor here. I know that even though you're a Marxist or a Leninist, whatever term you prefer to use, and in your mind, you're equal to me, even though you have not achieved anywhere near what I've achieved. You have not worked as hard as I've worked, and you're actually within the abode that I've created, within the framework, within the corporation that I've built. You still want to believe that you're equal to me? No, that's not the case. You're delusional.
And, you know, while everybody might not be acting the way Sterling acted, you know, while he was, in a way, an anomaly, I think there's also something to be said for the words that we try to come back and gather. Like, there's a reason why on the court when we talk trash, it's like, oh, you know, she owned you, or...
Yeah, that's called context. When you say I own you on the basketball court or on the football field, what you're saying is I'm dominating my opponent. When you have a corporation, you don't have any opponents there. You have people who are working together to make sure that the corporation is able to create as much financial windfall as possible, to make as much money as possible. So that's a very bad example.
I'm going to own you. Like we sometimes tend to take the words that hurt us the most and have been the most damaging.
You sound like you need to go to a psychiatrist.
We kind of try to reclaim those in a way. And so I think there's something to be said for that. Just again,
no, it is really not.
About those conditions, you know, what they let happen.
And not only did...
What a desperate, empathetic attempt to keep a lame conversation going. It just goes to show you why you can't take most of these people seriously.
Have a hard time with understanding the dynamics of being an owner of a team versus perhaps him thinking he had ownership of people. He also really showed trouble with black people. And
well, a lot of people show trouble with so-called black people. If you really want to go there, a lot of liberal black women show trouble with other black people, both women and men. A lot of low-level thinking so-called black men have trouble with other black people. We have issues within ourselves, but we want to focus on people like Donald Sterling because we want his validation.
In fact, his lover, his mistress, posted a picture of her with a black man, and this was a really specific black man. It was Magic Johnson, and that really triggered him. Ramona, why did that trigger him? Yeah.
As I've already stated, I believe that it triggered Donald Sterling because he knows a lot of things about Magic Johnson. I think he knows a lot of things about Magic Johnson.
That when I was reporting on this back in 2014, it became clear to me, and really when I watched that Anderson Cooper interview that Donald Sterling did, and he just melted down. I mean, this was 2 weeks after the tapes come out, and we're all watching this like, oh, he's finally going to talk. And then when he talks, I mean, he just made it all kinds of worse, right, with this? Mm-hmm.
No, he really didn't. He just didn't give a shit because he was trying to make sure that he sold himself as the character that they wanted him to be, which was just his real self. Because he already knew that his team was going to get sold. They were just trying to build up the asking price.
Magic Johnson, when Anderson Cooper asked him about Magic Johnson, this is when he melts down and starts blaming Magic Johnson for getting AIDS, right? And Anderson Cooper tries to say,
well, who else's fault would it be that Magic Johnson got AIDS? Of course it's Magic Johnson's fault.
Oh, he doesn't. He shouldn't be a role model. I mean, this was the big meltdown. This was the trigger point. And the more I looked at this, I was like, oh, there's a thing with Magic Johnson. There is a reason why Magic is the one.
Yeah, it seems to be a lover's quarrel.
Really sets him off. And I think it speaks to his really deep insecurity with Jerry Buss, the owner of the Lakers. And a lot of people don't know this, but we go through this in episode 2. Mm-hmm. Donald Sterling is the guy who comes in at the end when Jerry Buss is trying to close the sale of the Lakers to lend him the last...
Jerry Buss, a.k.a. Jerry Busstein.
$500,000 to close that sale at the last hour, okay? He's one of the visitors to the Forum Club, Jerry Buss' Forum Club, which was like Studio 54 on the West Side.
Absolutely. The Forum Club, modeled after Hugh Hefner's Playboy Mansion. Whole bunch of sex kittens in there. That's where Jerry Buss started to instruct Magic Johnson on the real ins and outs of Hollywood, or at least the undercurrent of Hollywood.
And you live to tell about it.
Special, yes.
As a matter of fact, I have a video called Magic Johnson and Jerry Buss. Oh no, Jerry Buss and Magic Johnson, Master and Apprentice.
Still here with us today.
Yes.
Donald Sterling was one of the main visitors to the Fordham Club that first year that Jerry Buss bought the team and the Lakers win the championship. And he turned to Jerry Buss's publicist, his name is Bob Steiner, and he says, "Hey, I need you to do for me what you did for Jerry." And Bob Steiner says, I can't do that. You have to buy the Lakers. Well, a few years later, he buys the San Diego Clippers, and Jerry Buss vouched for him.
Yes.
And I think when you look at Donald Sterling's story, the tragedy of it all, and there's many, is that this should have been a rags to riches story. When he was a poor kid from East LA, who's from immigrant family,
It was a rags to riches story. The dude sold a team for $2.2 billion. What are you not getting? He don't give a shit about what the media thinks about him.
way up, and now he becomes a very successful businessman in real estate. And instead of just telling that story, he spends most of his adult life chasing Jerry Buss and trying to chase that fame.
Absolutely right.
Yes, and now Jerry Buss is dead, and Donald Sterling is still alive, and has $2.2 billion from the sale of the Clippers, and he can go wherever he wants on the planet Earth and do whatever he wants. So in his mind, he won. He does not care what some 4'11" tall, 411-pound basketball writer thinks about him.
Bought the Clippers for $12.5 million, sold it for $2 billion. I mean, hey, but
Thank you, Steve, for once again bringing some facts to this conversation.
But the bottom line is that he wanted to be Jerry Buss in Los Angeles. That never happened. But I think, as we highlighted, and we want to crystallize this, I think we got to give credit for all the subjects that we're touching on. We got to give credit to a couple of people. Number one, Magic Johnson. Mm-hmm. Magic Johnson said, "I'll never go to another Clippers game again." It's number one.
So we have to give credit to Magic Johnson for saying that he'll never go to another Clippers game after Donald Sterling raked him over the coals. That's like giving somebody credit for wiping their ass after they do a number two.
Number two, LeBron James.
Yeah.
Chris Paul.
Yep.
Chris Paul, right there, working with the Players Association. LeBron James sat up there. LeBron was calling for him to be banned.
Absolutely.
Chris Paul was working the first day. Chris Paul was calling for that too. And by the way, they were working behind the scenes. They were going to boycott the playoffs. Mm-hmm. They literally, that's why Adam Silver stepped up and addressed it with the level of urgency that it deserves. Could you imagine? They're going into the playoffs.
Were they really going to boycott the playoffs, though, Stephen A. Smith? I saw an episode of The Jump with Marcus Spears, and he expressed his extreme disappointment that the LA Clippers only threw their warm-up jackets on the ground, but still played that game against the Warriors that day. I'm not quite sure if they were going to boycott the playoffs, but you know, you guys have a certain narrative that you want to push about Chris Paul and LeBron James like they're Malcolm X and Martin Luther King or some shit. Maybe it's true. I'm just not quite sure.
Not going to show up and play unless this man is dealt with. And so when we talk about empowerment and we talk about things of ownership, the word ownership and what have you, let's consider the evolution. We're talking about folks from the civil rights days that fought, sports figures that fought. And outside of that, this was the greatest movement we had ever seen in the modern era. Because behind...
What? This is the greatest movement that we've seen in the modern era. Give me a fucking break.
Those brothers were making things happen, not just to get him out, but to send a message. It's a new day, and we will not tolerate this kind of stuff.
This is such a fascinating story because there's so many big societal questions layered on top of it. The appropriateness of the term owner, racism in the United States, racism in the NBA, player empowerment, Donald Sterling's racism. But I do find it fascinating, and I just want to clarify with you, Ramona, that so much of it rested upon the insecurity and weakness of one man who felt like that he funded his biggest rival and could never achieve the acceptance and fame that Jerry Buss and the Lakers did, and Magic Johnson came to symbolize all of that?
Yes. And I think that you look in this story and
if you think that Donald Sterling is that mad at Magic Johnson just because Magic played for the Lakers and not for the Clippers, and that the person that Donald Sterling helped put on, Jerry Buss, achieved a greater level of fame and a greater level of success as the owner of the Lakers than he did with the Clippers, you're missing the whole boat. There's a lot more to this. I promise you that. As I've stated in other videos, Donald Sterling is a high-level Kabbalist, as is his wife. Magic Johnson is a Kabbalist as well, as was Jerry Buss. In that world, they all operate according to the Kabbalah, which is basically Jewish mysticism, another manifestation of the Babylonian Kemetic mystery school system. They worship Asar, aka Baal. And they operate according to certain motions to make sure that certain whims get fulfilled during a particular time period. And it's very important to them. They are at odds with one another, but the undercurrent is always that same Hollywood quote-unquote magic. Magic Johnson is a very important component in this case. I do believe that Donald Sterling knows a lot about Magic Johnson that Magic probably would not want the public to know, because in order for you to get to a high level out there in Hollywood, you have to be willful in participating in certain rituals, particularly pertaining to pansexuality. And when I hear Donald Sterling ramble on about Magic, it sounds like a lover's quarrel. That's just what it sounds like, or a scorned lover, I should say.
It and writing it and telling it, I just keep coming back to this idea. You cannot buy respect. You cannot own somebody. You cannot assert your power over somebody if they don't willingly give it. Okay? Jerry Buss didn't have to pick.
More feminist rambling. She's trying to use race as a cover for what she's actually being galvanized by. And that's the male-female dynamic.
To come to his parties. People wanted to come to his parties because he treated them with respect. He didn't force his players to come to the white parties that Donald Sterling used to throw. He didn't invite people to look at them in the locker rooms. People just wanted to be around Jerry Buss because he knew how to treat them. Right. Jerry Buss is a very similar guy. Yeah. Rex Rich's story himself. He liked the younger ladies himself, okay? But he treated them with a certain level of respect, and we didn't.
Bullshit. Jerry Buss had a little bit more swag, but he was a manipulator. That's a whole other story for another day. Jerry Buss had an entire coven, an entire group of MK Ultra beta sex kittens.
So we don't have V. Stiviano coming after Jerry Buss.
Well, what we see with Donald.
Because Jerry Buss was not trying to sell the Lakers. Stiviano came after Donald Sterling because they needed him to sell the Clippers.
We see what Donald Sterling is he made money. You know, he did that part, but he was not a good owner and clearly not a good person. And Stephen A., your point about athletes speaking up and using their voice.
Roz Gold, knock it off. If Donald Sterling came up to you and said, I'll fly you out to this island, I'm going to lavish you with diamonds and necklaces and bracelets and dresses, and all you got to do is give me some of that good, you do it. All right? Allegedly, you'll do it.
Force and put pressure on the league to make a decision like that. It also is a very fascinating conversation about the empowered NBA athlete and their power also to choose where they end up in teams and free agency. The NBA actually is very exciting around race, choice, power of black men.
Let's not.
Roz Gold is trying to sell that NBA narrative. She said that the NBA empowers black men. No, it's actually the opposite. Black men empower the NBA. This notion that the NBA is doing all these black men such a big favor, give me a fucking break. It's the opposite. The black man is empowering the NBA.
I agree with that, but let's not dilute what Natalie pointed out, because here's the bottom line. At the end of the day, when you consider all the things that we're talking about in terms of the word owner, what it means, etc., they looked at Donald Sterling not just as Donald Sterling, but to make sure you highlighted and use Donald Sterling as an example of what would not be tolerated moving forward. Because as you pointed out, they're looking at Donald Sterling and they're saying, you guys, the other owners, the league, you knew what he was. You know what he is. Why has he been around this long? Now, you might not have understood the nuances. How do you just get rid of a guy that owns the team? That's difficult to do. But they were making that statement.
Yes.
And as a result, it's framed a lot of things for the NBA moving forward in a very, very beneficial.
Absolutely. Increased accountability is important. All right, we could talk about this for so long, and we should. It deserves that kind of attention, but we got to go.
No, it really doesn't deserve that kind of attention. The only reason why you guys are talking about it is because you're trying to use the race canopy to push your equality doctrine. More cultural Marxist bullshit to make you feel like you're equal to a man, even when a man has accomplished way more than you. That's why you want to destroy the term owner. Because when you think of the term owner, you think of a man over a woman. And you're trying to pawn the so-called black man as usual. It is what it is.